All right, let's welcome a very special guest to the Pro Football Doc Sports Injury Central podcast. I feel like this is it's Robert Anderson, Bob Anderson, the number one foot and ankle surgeon to the athlete stars. Welcome to the show here.
Thank you, David.
This is like a continuation, Bob, of our what I'll call, I just made this up right now on the fly, our GOAT series. You're the GOAT of foot and ankle stuff in the NFL and in sports. And the guest previous to you was Bill Belichick, and he qualifies as a GOAT. So we'll see if we can keep the GOAT streak going here on our podcast guests. Before we talk about foot and ankle and other things, and I have lots of fun questions and topics for you. And I definitely want to get to the big change in your career where you may not be doing surgeries and why. But tell me about how your hip is doing, your hip replacement. How's that going?
Just had it done 2 weeks ago. Thanks for asking. It's doing great. Much easier than a knee replacement. So,
yeah, that's what I always say. Yeah, right. The surgery is bigger, but the recovery and rehab is easier, right? Have you had both done, knee and hip, or?
Totally. I've had one knee done, one hip done, and here I'm 2 weeks out, and this morning I was hitting some golf balls. So it's very nice not to have that constant pain. So I'm looking forward to getting back to activities and enjoying life again.
Yeah, the hip is a deeper surgery incision, but it's a true ball and socket joint, which makes it easier. The knee is not a true hinge joint, right? I mean,
you're absolutely right.
Makes the recovery a lot harder. So a couple of things we'll talk about. The couple of unusual things in your awesome career so far. One being, how did you become the perennial foot and ankle expert for football and all sports? I mean, you were a team physician with the Carolina Panthers at the time, and but how did it develop into a more national reputation and referrals?
Well, it actually started even before that, Dave. It's amazing how life is full of surprises and fate, so to say. But I wrote a paper and a chapter on sesamoid injuries back when I was a resident and an orthopedic fellow. And then 3 years in practice, I was sent a case of a Pro Bowl wide receiver who had a sesamoid issue, and it turned out to actually be a turf toe problem. And so we sort of investigated it and did surgery on the young man, and he did extremely well, came back to play and quite successfully. And that sort of snowballed into where I got involved with a number of the different team physicians, including yourself, a lot of the different trainers in the early 90s. And so as that one turf toe case occurred and fortunately was successful, it just snowballed into other types of foot and ankle injuries in the years to come. When the Carolina Panthers basically came to be in 1995, I was involved with the group that became the team physicians and the medical care providers for the team, and was initially a team consultant in 95, 96, and eventually one of the full-time team physicians in 99, and then held that position until 2017 when I got recruited by the Green Bay Packers.
Yeah, and that's very unusual, like unheard of, that a team physician, not someone who did internship, residency, or fellowship somewhere and helped out with one team and ended up with another, but a permanent, long-standing role with, two NFL teams. Coaches get fired and go to a new staff. Players get traded or free agency all the time, but team doctors do not. And so you have a very unusual distinction there.
Well, it basically came over a lot of years. So you well know Dr. Pat McKenzie, who's probably
great guy. Yes.
Yeah. His tenure in the NFL, he's been head team physician for the Green Bay Packers for 33 years now, 34 years. He and I were med students together. We've stayed very close over the years. And I've always provided the foot and ankle care from a long distance for his team. And so they created the Sports Performance Center across the street from Lambeau Field in 2017. And he finally persuaded me to come up to Green Bay and help him get that started and also help him with the care of the Green Bay Packers organization. So, um, thanks to my wife, she allowed me to go away for 6 years and leave her here in Charlotte. And so it was a unique experience. It's one I'll never forget. But yeah, taking care of two professional football teams with two different types of uh, organization structures was a very unique experience and a lot of memories made.
Yeah, I think that's what people think, that, a doctor's a doctor, medicine's medicine. But I say, look, it's as different as head coaches and their styles and schemes, or GMs and what they like. And medical opinions is like saying, Cam Ward is a number one pick. Someone may say another player is, right? I mean, there's differences there. So if the Packers play, I don't know the schedule. If the Packers play the Panthers this year, who are you rooting for?
I've always been a Packer fan ever since my boyhood days in Wisconsin. So um,
Even when you were team physician of the Panthers, you would root for the Packers?
I have no comment on that one. But the Green Bay Packers played in Charlotte a couple years ago, and I have two sons that are longstanding employees for the Panther organization. I was on the Packer side going against them. So we were friendly beforehand and afterwards, but during the game we didn't talk much, from the opposite side. But yeah, it's interesting. The Panthers do play in Green Bay this year, so I'll be there. I may just stay in a neutral seat up in the stand somewhere.
What color clothing are you wearing?
I actually have a jersey that's half and half, so I can
Oh,
go half Green Bay, half Carolina if I need to.
you're like the moms with two kids and split jerseys and
I'm
things.
definitely
Yeah.
Switzerland when it comes to that. Yes.
Well, very unusual to be in that circumstance. We're talking about, so you're the story about how you became whatever. I'll tell you I don't know if you even know this story, Bob. Maybe I told you over the years, but in San Diego with the Chargers, no offense, we have got good doctors in town, but we didn't really have a foot and ankle expert. And I'm not a foot and ankle expert. Sports foot and ankle, I think I have an idea of, but in the era of specialization, they wanted specialty stuff. And so I tried some guys in town. It really wasn't worth it. So we started sending MRIs to you, and then, as needed, guys flying out to see you, and you were very good. So my little story is, I guess I shouldn't say the player, although they wouldn't care in terms of HIPAA, but suffice it to say, it was one of our big time players that everyone would know the name of. And the and I'll ask you about agents in a second. Agents in some ways always drove me crazy, and in some ways I regret it. I should have probably been, more accommodating to agents. But our team just said, you don't need to deal with agents. The management would handle that part. So I just didn't deal with them, and it made my life easier. But I had this one agent that I had somewhat a relationship with that was mad at me for sending the MRI and films to you on a turf toe injury, and he demanded that I send the films to Andrews, Jimmy Andrews, who I love. I got no issue with Jimmy. And I was like, Jimmy's not a foot and ankle guy. He's a knee guy and shoulder guy. I sent it to the foot and ankle guy. And he did not like it. He wanted me to send it to Andrews as well. And then a couple hours later, he called back and said, I talked to Dr. Andrews, and Dr. Andrews said Dr. Anderson was good and okay for foot and ankle. And so he agreed to do it. And then I'm not going to say the agent's name. And then the next year, this is a true story, we had another, I'll let the cat out of the bag a little bit, Hall of Fame-ish player who had an injury and foot and ankle area. And that same agent called me demanding that I send the films to you, Bob Anderson. And I'm like, A, we've already sent them. B, do you not remember our conversation a year ago? You were saying don't use this guy, and I was saying we wanted to use this guy. Let's, So,
Well, and those are the years that you and I and many other people were trying to figure out the agent's role in the direction of medical care when it came to their clients and our patients. teams, players, our patients, and their clients. And, I was sort of like you when I came through this. My original thought process was I'm not going to take a referral from an agent. I will not talk to an agent directly, just like an attorney. That's not my role. I didn't want to be the guy that appeared to be like snaking a patient away from somebody else. So I pretty much only would take a referral, consultation, player visit from one directed by yourself, by a team physician, or by the trainer. And it was nothing against the agents. I just really thought that was the proper way to do that. And over time, though, what I've realized, and I've had a wonderful relationship with agents across the whole country in many different sports, but it's commonplace now for the agent to be very involved in the direction of the medical care that the player does obtain. And so you have to have them as part of the group discussion, as part of the decision making initiative. And so it really has it's been a big 360 to see that change, where the agent now is very, very intimately involved, whereas years past it was one of those things where you and I would go behind them, not necessarily behind them, but on our own level.
Yeah, and I think part of how that's evolved, Bob, is that the vast majority, not all, but the vast majority of teams now, the model has changed. It's hospital sponsorship. And I think when players and agents and players' families see a hospital sponsorship and that somehow is tied to who the physician is, even though it's not supposed to be tied directly, it generates some potential distrust, right? And back, in the San Diego Chargers days, we never had a hospital sponsorship. And when we finally did, the Chargers did, it was with a hospital that I wasn't even involved with. And they just did the advertising. And then they were mad that they didn't get a team physician slot. So I think that has eroded the trust over time. And if I had to do it all over again, Bob, I just thought the team did me a favor by saying you don't have to deal with agents. And so I just didn't. But in some ways, that fosters more distrust if you don't talk to them. And what I've always thought of agents is, see if you agree with me here. We're not singling out any agent in particular, but in general, I call agents well-meaning family members that are trying to help their player, or the well-meaning son or daughter that's trying to help dad, or the well-meaning mom or dad that's trying to help their son or daughter, right? And we deal with that in our regular practices, where there's sort of a family spokesperson who comes out and has extra questions, or what about this for their toe, or what about this, and they're asking, and sometimes they're very good questions, but sometimes the family spokesperson is the closest thing to medical in their family, and it's a dental hygienist, right? And they don't necessarily have the right questions. And so I've grown to respect agents as well-meaning people, but they don't always, they're not doctors. They don't always get it. And so it's someone that you want to try and work with as a well-meaning family member.
No, well said. I mean, again, like I said, I've got a great relationship with hundreds of different agents, and I've always found to be very respectful. And like you say, asking the right questions. They are sort of the mediator. They are the connection, I guess, between us and their client, between us and the patient, trying to explain to the family what's going on and try to keep everything organized and well oiled. And I looked at it as my job to try to educate the agent and say, okay, this is what I believe is going on. This is what I believe is the best form of treatment, and these are the people I'd recommend, if surgery is necessary, to be involved. And I think that it's become now routine with the collective bargaining agreement language, where agents and the player do have the ability to decide where they want to go, how they want their medical care paved out. I think they're an important part of the whole process. And so I don't avoid them. I embrace them, and I enjoy talking to them and educating them, make sure that their client gets the best treatment possible.
Yeah. I mean, look, I haven't been a team physician in a while, but I used to tell players, yes, absolutely. if any, and I tell my current patients, if any doctor tells you you shouldn't go get a second opinion, you should run and go get one. What I often say to my patients is, look, you're free to go get one. Go ahead and go get one. Go find a good guy. But in some ways, this already is a second opinion because we have the MRI, blah, blah, blah. And it's pretty straightforward. I don't think you need one, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't go get one, right? There's a difference. And I've also had agents in my time, he used to send every ankle sprain on the Chargers somewhere else for a second opinion, one of his guys. And then he'd send me his Dallas Cowboy players for a second opinion. And I'm like, wait a minute. So am I a good guy or a bad guy? Right. And
it's a check and balance. It's a check and balance. But
yeah, and he's like, well, I think their feeling was that when it comes to Charger players, I was too beholden to the team to tell the truth. And what he didn't realize is if you mess with a player in the locker room, nothing spreads faster than the locker room banter, right? Like this doctor didn't treat me right, and that's not what you want. So you always want to treat guys right, not only as a doctor and your Hippocratic oath, but I always told the team and anyone, right? You want to take care of the assets of any business you're in. If you're at a bank, you're taking care of the money. If you're on a football team, you're taking care of the players. Those are the assets, right? And that should be number one.
And and I was very fortunate, David, in that even though I was a team physician, 95% of my consults came from outside of the organizations I was taking care of. So it was always a very unique situation for me where the majority of work I was doing is for other teams like yours. And so it made it a little easier on me as well.
Yeah. And did anyone at the Panthers or Packers ever say, hey, you're our guy, we don't take care of that division rival or anything like that? Did that ever come up?
Never. We had a Hall of Fame head coach that I once said, hey, just want you to know I'm going to be operating on such and such tomorrow. I'm very involved with some of these other teams. Does that bother you? He goes, no. And in fact, I want you to do your absolute best job, because the way professional sports are these days, that guy may be playing for us next year or the year after. So make him good, because he might be on our team trying to contribute to us in the near future. So
well, that's good. I never actually had a situation of that, but the closest was when Junior Seau was playing for the Patriots and he broke his arm and he flew back to San Diego and I did his surgery. And I was like, he's going to be ready for postseason. And we both were doing well at that particular season. I was like, this is not going to be good if Junior plays in 6 weeks and he sacks Phillip Rivers and they a tackle made by Junior Seau, and somehow on the TV broadcast they say, and his doctor that fixed him is here, but he's on the Charger sideline. And I'm not sure how Dean Spanos and the Chargers would have looked at it. But thankfully, before even talking to me after the surgery, the Patriots put him on IR. And then those days, IR was one way. So it never came to fruition for me either. But I did think about the possibility. Exactly. But, I had to do right by your patient. In that case, it was Junior, getting him back as quickly as possible. I'm sure that's how you did, and that's how you got your good reputation.
I mean, when it comes down to it, these players are our patients, first and foremost. We're physicians and they're the patient, and you have to do what's best for them, not in the short term, but the long term. And
and the other thing people don't realize is, I don't know about you, but for me, even though there's some notoriety in taking care of some of these guys, 95+% of my patients are regular everyday weekend warriors and what have you, right? I mean, in terms of volume and we all have our regular day jobs outside of being a team physician. Nobody's a full-time team physician, right? And getting all their salary from one place. It's just one of the many consulting jobs that we have. So tell me about the big change in your practice. So you made an announcement, you used to be the number one guy doing all the surgeries, but you're going to consult on players still and help direct, but you're not going to do any surgeries anymore on these professional athletes. Tell me about that and what goes into that decision.
So it's a very personal decision, but also it's a business professional one. So, I've been doing this for 36 years, so I've had, I've had a good run, so to say. And I decided, or my wife helped decide that, family time was also important. Nobody ever sits there on their deathbed and goes, boy, I wish I had worked one more day. And so she said, it's time for us to start, doing a little traveling and spending more time at our lake home in Wisconsin. When you're still doing surgery on these guys, as you know, when an injury happens, they want it corrected and fixed yesterday. And so you pretty much have to be available 24/7, 365 days a year. And you can't go on vacation for an extended period of time. I can't be in Wisconsin and have a guy get injured where suddenly I got to fly back to Charlotte and take care of him. So finally figured out that there's no way you can continue to manage the elite athlete, particularly from a surgical standpoint, and be part-time. And so it came down to, I said, okay, I do want to be part-time in availability. I do want to do some traveling. Maybe this is the time to get out of the surgical, part of my orthopedic practice. That, and as well as, you start looking at your health and your, durability, so to say, and also the business part of it. I'll be honest, Dave, is that, as the medical legal environment has changed, our malpractice premiums have gone up, and yet the reimbursement for taking care of the injured athlete, who generally comes under workers' compensation guidelines, has gone down dramatically. And so you start looking at the balance sheet, and you're saying, okay, I'm working part-time. It's still going to cost me a lot to pay off my malpractice premium, but I'm going to be doing less surgery, less reimbursement. It just doesn't fit. And so for all those reasons, it seemed like a good time for me to venture out of the surgical world and just do basically office practice and consultations, and still trying to be helpful to other physicians and agents and athletes, patients, in regard to what I think is the best treatment for them, but also getting them to the right person.
Gotcha. So that you bring up an interesting point that I think most people don't realize, that you don't really get paid more for doing a surgery on a premium professional athlete than you do on the utilities worker, right? I mean, if it's work comp structure, et cetera, because athlete injuries are workers' compensation injuries. And the extra time you spend on them, or agents or whatever, and quite honestly, potential liability, right? And I know other team physicians have been worried about the liability side. And, this is why more doctors involved with big hospitals are taking care of teams as opposed to individual groups, because the liability side, the average malpractice coverage, right? And to educate people, and I assume yours is similar, is either 1 million, 3 million, or 2 million, 4 million, which is 1 million per occurrence, 3 million in aggregate, or 2 million per occurrence, 4 million in aggregate. That's standard. So 1 million or 2 million doesn't take care of lost wages of any athlete, much less a star athlete. And I know that the long snapper verdict in Philadelphia has had major repercussions throughout the sports medicine and physician world. The long snapper, I don't want to get it wrong, but he was awarded tens of millions of dollars on a knee issue. And I think that sent some fears throughout our industry in general.
No, you're absolutely right. And again, over the last 2 years, I've done nothing but take care of the elite athlete. I've basically concentrated my practice only on managing the elite athlete with the foot and ankle issues. So every case was high profile. Every case was stressful. And like you say, it's very, very time consuming when you have to plan everything out, be available, talk to trainers, agents, team physicians, and then it's all the monitoring afterwards too. And then again, you're not getting reimbursed much. And then again, you have that always that medical legal thing just gnawing at the back of you. And you're right, in a private practice situation like I'm in right now, you have your $1 million, $3 million coverage, which really doesn't go a very long way in this day and age. And then now you go one step further and you say, well, now it's the college kids with NIL. So they too are so-called at-risk patient population, because if something doesn't go well with one of their surgeries and they don't continue with their college career and receive their NIL money, they can actually come after you and say loss of future earnings. And that's the other big term out there now, is loss of future earnings. So I think you're absolutely right. I think that what we're seeing is this paradigm shift, so to say, where I think we're going to find more and more team physicians are going to be employed with very large university or hospital systems that are self-insured.
Yes, yes. And, I was in private practice with no one, and that's a dying breed, right? And you were at least in a group, which helps, but still doesn't have the big hospital backing or university backing.
But in a group, the flip side is you're putting all your partners at risk too.
Yes.
And as you know, what happened in Philadelphia with the group there is that even though it's one or two team physicians, the entire group is responsible. So you have people who have never taken care of an elite athlete in their life that are also financially responsible for the outcome of those verdicts.
Yeah, and that's something that I'm not sure what the solution is nowadays, but so you're getting out when the getting's good, I guess, and enjoying life and listening.
At least from the surgical standpoint, I'm really enjoying the ongoing relationships, the ability to consult. But yeah, I think putting the scalpel away right now is probably not a bad idea for me.
Gotcha. Well, I haven't put the scalpel away. I still work, but I'm not doing any team stuff. And you also said something very interesting. What I like about what I do now is kind of funny. And I think you can back me up on this. When you're doing a surgery on one of your professional athletes, does the surgery take more time and you're dealing with the patient take more of your time? Or does the talking to the agent and the team and the team physician and the trainer, whatever? I know the answer to this, but I want people to hear it from you. What takes more time, for you to actually do the work, or all the talking you have to do about the case and the players and other people?
I always spend much more time with the preoperative discussion and the post-operative care than I do the surgery itself. I mean, just take, for example, an Achilles tendon repair. We do an awful lot of those. And, that's a 30, 45-minute procedure. But you'll spend hours on top of hours talking to people before that surgery. And then we'll be doing weekly virtual visits with, athletic trainers, rehab specialists, and the patient afterwards for weeks and months afterwards, monitoring the situation. So you're right. For something like, that, or a turf toe repair, or a Jones fracture fixation, or Lisfranc injury, all those things, yes, the amount of time spent before and after surgery is much, much greater than the time in the operating room itself.
The time spent talking about the surgery is longer than the surgery itself. That's what I would say. And that's the funny thing about kind of what I do now with injury analysis from afar. I mean, look, Jason Tatum, boom, that's an Achilles rupture. It's obvious on video. If you saw it, you would know it too, right? And then I'm kind of done with it. My staff may repurpose some articles, but I don't have to deal with it anymore, and talk about it. And so it's an interesting thing. So who's going to take the mantle now?
I think
some young person.
Let's go back, 20, 30 years when, you and I first met. And there were only a handful of us, like you said, they're doing the orthopedic foot and ankle in these elite athletes. And some have retired before me, and there's a couple left, not many, doing specifically orthopedic foot and ankle management of the athlete. But over time, we've had fellowships, and we've educated young men and who have developed their own practice and become very good in their own right. And I think what we're going to see, David, is over the next few years, it'll become much more regionally oriented as far as the direction of treatment. Guys aren't going to have to fly from the West Coast to the East Coast to get an Achilles tendon repair anymore, or to get a Jones fracture fixed. I've taught almost 100 fellows now that are positioned throughout the entire country. I can look at a case, I can say, this is what I recommend doing, boom, boom, boom. This is not complicated. It's very straightforward. And that player is in this city right now. I'd recommend these three guys. And I think that's what we're going to see. I think the days of guys flying across the country to get care is going to be dated. I have never believed it's the safest way to go. I think that continuity of care, having something done in your own area is probably the best in case there are any post-op complications. I was just in a situation where there just weren't people with experience in their community that were able to do the surgeries, successfully, and that's why people would come to me. I don't think we have that same problem anymore. I think thanks to our fellowship teaching, we've got the opportunity now to use more local people with adequate skill sets.
It is Dr. Robert Anderson has his big coaching tree, so to speak, right? Your
Yes,
medical tree.
we do.
As they always talk about, be it with Andy Reid or Bill Belichick or whoever else, or Nick Saban, right? The GOAT here has his own coaching tree. That's good. All right, so a medical question for you, and curious as to how you will respond. Everyone knows more about things now, and everyone is worried about the dreaded A's, I call it. The non-contact ACLs and non-contact Achilles, et cetera. And I get asked this every single week on Twitter or X, that there has to be more Achilles tendon ruptures and why, or more foot and ankle injuries and why. Because you see Jason Tatum and Damon Lillard and Aaron Rodgers and all these different Deshaun Watson and people, household names and so forth with Achilles. Do you think that there are more Achilles tendon ruptures now than in the past? And if so, why?
Well, actually, it's not what I think, it's what I know. Fortunately, I've been, chairing up the NFL Foot Ankle Committee for over 20 years. And so I get to see the real data. And it has not changed much. I mean, there's some years we may see 15 Achilles, or it might be a year we see 20. It pretty much stays right around 18 Achilles ruptures in the NFL per year. It really doesn't change that much. Now, a lot of times they occur in high profile people. They are just like ACLs. You're out for a season when you have one. So as they say, the so-called injury burden is significant, but we have not seen this huge upswing of Achilles tendon ruptures over the last, at least 10 years. They just happen. And unfortunately, it's an injury which is somewhat unpredictable. We tend to see them more in the preseason, or at least we have in the past. We're doing a big video analysis now with the help of NFL research, and we're looking at different maneuvers that the players may be making that might put them at a higher risk for getting Achilles tendon rupture. I'm not sure it's going to really lessen the incidence, but perhaps we can maybe teach different styles to avoid some of these Achilles ruptures. There's always been the thinking that they occur more in deconditioned players, more with guys that are dehydrated. So we can sort of try to change some of those variables as well. But it's been a pretty consistent incident year after year.
Yeah, when you see Aaron Rodgers with Achilles and Kirk Cousins with an Achilles, and then you see Dre Greenlaw in the Super Bowl running in from the sideline, innocuous and with an Achilles, I think the prevailing thing is it's more. But I think what I always say, it's not the injuries that are more, it's the coverage of the injuries that are more, right? Nowadays, about every backup left guard with an injury, so to speak. It used to be you might only know about some of the superstars. And then when it does hit the superstars, you think that there's more of a certain injury out there, so to speak.
Well, and you know how high profile quarterbacks are to begin with. And then you have 2 one year. We had another one last year. We haven't had a quarterback with Achilles rupture in over a decade. So, but these are high profile players, or like you say, Richard Sherman coming to the sideline and saying, I just ruptured my Achilles tendon. I mean, you're right. These guys, the visibility we now have through social media and TV coverage is, significantly more extensive than we had years ago. And I think the public's perception is, yes, there's this huge upswing, but I can guarantee it's not. It's been pretty much a standard number per year.
Yeah, that's interesting. It seems to me that maybe some of it is our knowledge of foot and ankle injuries. I mean, look, an Achilles tendon is pretty easy to diagnose, and obviously you'll concur. You don't need an MRI to confirm it. but that's what every team says. Oh, we don't know, MRI pending kind of thing. I'm like, no, they already know Jason Tatum ruptured his Achilles. I can see it on the video. You can see it on the video. The Celtics just aren't saying yet. And there's good reason for them not to say. I'm not saying it's wrong. You don't need an MRI for that. But I think our knowledge of foot and ankle injuries has gotten a lot better. I mean, the average guy knows the difference now between a high ankle and a low ankle sprain, right? And that used to not be the case. And, people actually say Liz Frank injuries now, that's a very specific injury. And as you talked about sesamoid and turf toe. But the one thing that I do observe casually, and I don't have the stats, is it does seem there have been gradually across my practice more foot and ankle injuries over time than in this way. And I rationalize it as bigger, stronger, faster, but my Achilles isn't any smaller than any of these NFL quarterbacks or any of these big time players. And if you keep planting a bigger tree into the same size pot, or more horsepower in a car with the same suspension, I mean, it all comes down to your base, which is foot and ankle. And if your foot doesn't get bigger with training or stronger with training, and you're adding more forces, there is potentially more potential harm that can come to the area.
No, you're right. And that's one of the reasons I got involved back in the early 2000s is I got a phone call from the medical director and the commissioner of the NFL saying, the owners were concerned about the number of foot and ankle injuries in some of their star players. We started looking into it. And that was about the same time there was this shift in the surfaces that these guys are playing on. So you go from grass to more turf, and you start looking at these shoes these guys are wearing that are more apparel than they are protective equipment. And you start looking at this so-called, cleat surface interchange, and add that, like you said, bigger guys, faster guys, more energy put into it. And so over time, we did see more and more foot and ankle injuries. And it got to a point where about 35% of all lower extremity injuries were of the foot and ankle. And over the last 10 years, that has stayed steady. We have, even with the changes in the turf, the changes in the shoes, we're still seeing about the same number of foot and ankle injuries per year. And the ones you mentioned, take away Achilles, because that's sort of a unpredictable one. But you're right, the Jones fracture, Liz Frank, the turf toe, the high ankle sprains, much like ACL, they probably have something to do with that torque created by the shoe surface interface. And that's one of the things NFL research we've tried to look into, is we've tried to redefine the turf toe injury, Liz Frank injury, how a high ankle sprain occurs, and then from there try to figure out, can we prevent them? And obviously more work to be done in that regard, but the foot and ankle injuries that are occurring are of concern, and they're not going down in incidents by any means.
Okay, so the big question here for the GOAT foot and ankle doctor who ran the shoe surface studies and the foot and ankle committee studies and everything else, and they're turf versus grass. Should all NFL stadiums be grass? Where do you fall on that discussion?
I won't give you necessarily my opinion on that, but I can tell you almost every player will tell you they'd rather play on grass than they would on.
What's Bob Anderson's opinion on that?
So, well, I mean, part of it is just a very realistic one, is with all the number of indoor stadiums we have now around the country, you're going to have artificial surfaces, within those venues. It's very unusual of a place like Arizona that grows grass outside and then brings it in for the games. You can't do that in downtown Detroit. It's yes. Do I like grass over artificial turf? For a number of reasons, I do. I think artificial turf has gotten much, much better thanks to the so-called best practices that have been instituted, trying to get the right blend of the sand and the rubber and the right seams in the woven product. But I still love the idea of grass when feasible. But I just don't think in this day and age you're going to find that to be the norm because of all these huge indoor roofed stadiums that we now have. It always amazed me though, Dave, is that, you go to Green Bay and they grow grass in January. It's the most amazing thing to see these heat lamps out there creating a glow in the middle of the night as they keep that grass alive till the very end of the season. You go, well, if they can grow grass in Green Bay in winter, why can't we figure out a way to grow grass indoors?
I hear they mix cheese into the soil. No, just kidding.
But yeah, it'll be
No,
interesting to see, the new technology. I think again, what's sort of the idea is there a way to create an artificial turf that mimics grass? And I think that's where a lot of the technology is going now.
yeah, the hybrids and what have you. You're right that you can't make the change overnight unless the stadium was designed a certain way. Arizona, Las Vegas, etc. You can't make it grass and make it work without a lot of pre-thought and planning to these now $5 billion stadiums, right? Kind of thing. And sure, they bring in grass for the soccer matches, okay, but that's 150-pound guys playing 2-3 games, across several weeks. This is not 350-pound guys and the torque, etc. I always, there's no question. I think grass is better, as you know from your studies. The difference is not as great as players and fans in general think. On an absolute sense, grass is better if possible. But I would argue that it's not really an argument about grass versus turf. There are many different kinds of turf, and there are many different kinds of grass. And to me, it's a matter of the consistency of the surface, number one. We have a famous case, Wes Welker, grass in Houston, but there were seams in the pallets where they were bringing in the grass that he injured his knee on when his foot got caught in one of the seams, and that was grass. So it's more about the consistency of the surface rather than anything else. But there you go. Thank you for your thought on grass versus turf. That's what I definitely wanted to ask.
As a foot and ankle guy, I've always said a little slippage is good. So if a guy slips a little bit, I'm okay with that because that means they're releasing torque and probably have less risk of a lower extremity injury. But you're right. There's a lot of variables that go into it. And I think that you hit it right on the head. Players will tell you too, they just wish there was consistency. If we're going to play on artificial turf, they'd love to have the artificial turfs all be the same. And it would be nice too if we could figure out how to throw up a little bit of a divot with an artificial surface. They always say the divot on grass is what prevents these guys from getting some of the injuries. If we could do that on artificial turf, that'd be great.
Give away cleat studs. No, I'm just kidding.
That's another technology you may see in the future where cleats give away at a certain amount of torque.
Like ski bindings, right? And that's kind of what I said. You tear your ACL when the binding doesn't release, right? Exactly. I mean, if the binding releases, it saves your ACL. That's poor footing, right? The slippage. And one thing, I feel like I'm the old guy now. I guess, I'm not retired yet or halfway retired. I got little kids still. But I remember the fellows that I would train would look at me like I had 3 heads. And I still say this to this day for Sports Injury Central and whatever, and see if you back me up on this. I say, look, there aren't going to be a lot of a certain type of injury today, like ACL or Achilles or some of the others. There are going to be more hamstrings or muscle injuries because it's rainy and wet. You don't have the same forces, and there is the built-in give, whether you're on turf or grass, because it's rainy and wet out today. You agree with that and your team position experience in Green Bay?
No, you're absolutely right. Well, those soft tissue injuries of lower extremity, whether it's groin, hamstring, quad, whatever, I mean, those things are just, there's so many of them out there, and they do end up with so much loss of time. But you're right. Those are the kind of injuries that you'll see on that sloppy field. Whereas when I get to a sloppy field, you're not going to see a lot of the torque related, like you say, the high ankle sprains, the ACLs, and such, because the foot's going to give away.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. I was a bad judge on time. I thought I could make it a quick conversation, but I should have known that we would talk longer and have fun. I hope you had fun. Anything else you want to add to the conversation anyway? Talk about anything that you've got going on. Open mic.
No, I really don't. I mean, it's been a good run. I'm not done yet. I still want to do, a lot more research on this whole lower extremity injury and the athlete, just trying to figure out, again, ways that we could somehow decrease some of the incidents we're seeing, and really spilling this out into the general population, the high school kids, that are playing on different field surfaces on every Friday night, or some of the college kids. How can we make the game safer for everybody, not just the professional athlete?
Yeah, and to that end, what I was saying about consistency of surface, if you ask me, should your high school have grass or have turf? Okay, in a perfect world, well manicured grass is my answer. However, if it's a heavily used field and you're going to have ruts in the grass and holes and different consistencies in the grass surface, you might be better off with a consistent turf surface overall.
And it's educating educate even the young kids and the parents. Is there value to taping? What kind of shoe should you have? What kind of cleat should you be wearing? One of the things I see so much in different sports, David, not just football, is people wearing the wrong size shoe. We see kids playing soccer wearing a shoe that's 2 sizes smaller than what they should be, and wide receivers doing the same thing, or basketball players going to shoes that are too lightweight and bending to the wrong location. And so simple things like that, we need to go out and educate the younger population. When people are in high school, that's where you can tell them, listen, you don't need taping. Taping really doesn't work. So they don't get into college and professional life and think they got to be taped for every game. So it's those kind of things. We're trying to get more of a groundswell at an earlier age, trying to educate people. Maybe, again, that some of these shoes and cleats are not just apparel. It's part of your protective equipment.
Okay, so final question. In the last couple of weeks, I've seen a lot online, and people ask me, and I've seen it from pro basketball players, it's the shoes they wear today that leads to the Achilles. Back in my day, when this is an athlete talking, when we all wore high tops, we didn't have this kind of stuff. Do high tops prevent Achilles or other injuries?
No, I don't think shoes and Achilles may have a whole lot of association, but definitely with other foot and ankle injuries. We see the narrow shoe, the Jones fracture, the foot hanging off the side of the shoe, maybe more stress, the turf toe with too much flexibility in the front of the shoe. So I think there is some merit in the discussion of proper shoe fitting with certain injuries, probably not Achilles.
There you go. All right, foot and ankle goat. He's still going to be around for consultation. Enjoy, quote, half retirement life. It's a good way. No more surgeries, no more stress, more cabin time in Wisconsin. Thank you for joining us on the Pro Football Doc podcast. I really appreciate you and your friendship over the years, and congratulations on a great and continued career.
I appreciate the invite, David. Great talking with you.
All right, we'll go back to the rest of the usual, I'm sure less boring Pro Football Doc Sports Injury Central podcast than the great Bob Anderson, having him on. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.